Coming up on Colonial Crossfire. Obama's Supreme Court nomination. Normalized relations with Cuba. And Putin's withdrawal from Syria. Joining us on the left, Martin McSherry. On the right, Ali Kukos. And I'm your moderator, Andrew Desiderio. This is Colonial Crossfire. The fight is on over President Obama's Supreme Court nominee. Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. The shocking death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia rocked the political world and raised the stakes of this election even higher. The president put forth a nominee to replace Scalia, Merrick Garland, but the Republican-controlled Senate is refusing to even allow a hearing. So, who has the upper hand in this new political battle? Should Garland get a fair shake? And which Senate precedent will reign supreme? Here to analyze that and more, our student panel. On the left, Martin McSherry, a junior from New York majoring in political communication. Martin is the campaign director for the GW College Democrats and the president of the Pre-Law Student Association. On the right, Ali Kukos, a sophomore from Newton, Massachusetts, majoring in political science and communication. Ali is a member of the GW College Republicans and was the GW chair of Students for Carly Fiorina. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Judge Garland was praised by many as a centrist who's one of the most qualified jurists for the job. But President Obama couldn't make everyone happy. Some to his left weren't happy that the president nominated a white male to the high court and believed he could have made a bolder choice. Now, from almost the moment we learned of Justice Scalia's death, both sides began to politicize it. We've grown accustomed to that here in Washington, but the real question now is whether Republicans will cave after thus far maintaining their position to not even hold a hearing. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell argues that the Senate traditionally does not confirm Supreme Court nominees in an election year, and that the next president should decide who replaces Scalia. Democrats, meanwhile, say the president has an obligation, at the very least, to fulfill his constitutional obligation.
What we have here is Republicans in their usual obstruction manner. I don't know why McConnell's done this to his senators. He's marching these men and women over a cliff, and I don't think they're going to go.
Well, I don't think it's a good idea to move the court to the left, but that's not really the issue here. It's not the person, it's the principle. Who ought to make this lifetime appointment? It's the next president, not this one.
Now, despite what the party leaders are saying, a recent poll shows that 56% of Republicans believe that Judge Garland should at least get a hearing, and 62% of Republicans think the Senate GOP is just playing politics. So, Ali, I'll turn to you first. Do you think this hurts your party in November?
I do, honestly, because because the thing is, clearly public opinion is going against them, but at the same time, they've been very adamant about the fact that this is what they're going to do. They're not going to hold a hearing, and to continue pushing them, be like, oh, they're playing politics. It's like they've just decided this. You need to kind of accept that, move forward from it, and take whatever consequences are going to happen with them come November.
Mm-hmm. So then how do you square what Republican voters are saying with what their Senate leader is saying? How do you square those two in an election year?
I mean, I think Mitch McConnell is going to see what happens come November with the Republicans, but he has to understand that public opinion is going against him right now. But again, he said they're not going to hold the hearing, and I think at this point, holding the hearing wouldn't do any good, because if it comes to a vote, they're not going to take it to a vote.
Martin, Republicans have pointed to the so-called Biden rule. Mm-hmm. Doesn't the heat of this campaign lend reason to the notion that maybe we should wait until next year, until after this election is done?
So the Biden rule is not a rule. There are 4 reasons why. Number one, it was hypothetical. If you look at the speech, he said the Senate should seriously consider postponing a nominee, and it never happened. There was no nominee that came up. Number two, he later said in the speech, and they don't say this, he later said, I would be willing to compromise in an election year if they put forward a moderate nominee, like, for example, Merrick Garland. And lastly, not lastly, I'm not going to Rick Perry this.
It's fine.
Biden, as chairman or ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, put through 8 justices in the Supreme Court, more than anyone alive today, including, by the way, Anthony Kennedy, who was a Republican nominated and confirmed in an election year. And lastly, he said it in June, not March or February of an election year, so it was a little later into the season. It's not really a rule, and Republicans are obstructing They're incapable of governing. The American people see it. And swing state Republican senators like Senator Mark Kirk of Illinois have come around to seeing it. They said, man up and take a vote. I agree with
So
Senator
you think it will
Kirk.
hurt them in November?
It will, yeah.
All right, you two agree on that. Allie, doesn't the president at least have a mandate to, I guess, at least nominate someone, given that he was reelected to a 4-year term?
I mean, I think he does, like you said with Kennedy. I mean, he was put through, and it was a Democrat-controlled Senate. So he should have the right to do that. It shouldn't be them refusing to. But again, because the Republicans have been so adamant that they're not going to hold the hearing, and if it comes to a vote, they're not going to vote, at this point, I think it's a moot point.
Martin, I mentioned this at the top, but Garland has, of course, been praised by many. He's been called a centrist, but liberals have issues with him. How do you personally feel about him?
He's all right. It makes sense for this time. He's a very qualified jurist. No one's really questioning his integrity or his scholarship. Certainly better than whoever Donald Trump would put on the bench. And I think that right now Republicans' whole strategy is, let's wait to see who the hell Donald Trump puts on the bench. And they hate Donald Trump. It's a bizarre strategy. They're incapable of governing themselves, and they want control of the entire country.
Allie, what do you think of Judge Garland? He's obviously very liberal in guns. The NRA came out strongly against him, as we would expect. But what are your thoughts on him?
I'm personally not a fan. I don't like the fact that he's been ruling in favor of federal regulations a lot when he was on the D.C. circuit courts. And so, I mean, he is, I guess, somewhat centrist, but at the same time, from a fiscal standpoint, I'm not a fan of him.
Senator McConnell has already shot this possibility down, but it's been said that maybe if the Democrats do win the election in November, the Republicans should try to push through Garland, given that he's more moderate than someone who Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders would pick. Do you see kind of the rationale with that argument?
I do, but at the same time, I think it'd just be really bad for them, just PR-wise, to do that, because you've already said you're not going to do it, and then being like, oh, we're going to backtrack, just kidding. We're going to actually put him through, would just be, they kind of need to make up their mind and just stick to whatever they're going to do.
Martin, what do you think about that possibility?
I think Merrick Garland's getting on the court no matter what. I think if Hillary Clinton gets in, they're going to rush to confirm him. I think if Donald Trump gets it, they're going to rush to confirm him as well, because they have no idea who Donald Trump would put on the highest court in the land. Right, they should act now. They shouldn't wait until then, because 4 and 4, it doesn't work. The highest court in the land can't be in a stalemate. It needs to operate. We need to fulfill our constitutional obligations, not our privileges, our obligations to make government function. And again, Republicans' entire modus operandi is to stop the government from running, as they're asking us to let them run the government.
Allie?
I mean, no.
Saw you laugh, so I'll give you the response.
They do have the, like, they can run a government. I think it's kind of absurd to say they can't. But at the same time, they're very adamant about this, and I do understand where they're coming from in the sense that their party right now, with Donald Trump and the whole dynamics of the Republican nomination, are very in flux. And so they need to kind of figure out internally what's going on, and they are capable of running a government. They've done it before. I mean, look at Reagan, look at Bush. But, I mean, it could be argued on the same time, though, that it depends on your standpoint, I guess, who you're asking.
Moving on to 2016 implications then, do you think this is an issue that will sort of get people out to vote in November? And, you know, a lot of candidates have said, you know, the court actually hangs in the balance with this election. Do you think it'll kind of be a motivator to get people out on both sides?
I do. I think there's a lot of things. I mean, look at Donald Trump. No one thought he was going to get to where he is, and people are motivated to vote for him. So I think it will. I think there's a lot of other factors that play into it as well, depending on social issues, fiscal issues, and this is just one of the other issues that, depending on if you're passionate about it, it might be the deciding factor for you to vote.
Martin, does this push up voter turnout?
Yeah, and when more people vote, Democrats benefit. I think Republicans already turn out in high numbers, so if this drives turnout for Democrats, who, by the way, some perhaps disaffected Bernie folks if and when Hillary Clinton gets the nomination. Whoever the nominee is, whoever she is, voters will be motivated to turn out even if they oppose Hillary
I wonder
Clinton
who you
in the
could be
primary.
talking about. Anyway, moving on. Who is your ideal candidate, or what is your ideal candidate's litmus test for a Supreme Court nominee, and should that litmus test be disclosed by that candidate?
Yeah, I think number one, overturning Citizens United, the disastrous decision that sent a flood of money into elections, that lifted all the limits on campaign finance. Someone who disagrees with that decision would be a litmus test. And also, I think another thing that's really important that I can't see a way getting around is protecting a woman's right to choose, and protecting that on the court. after all these years, after Roe versus Wade. So those would be two litmus tests I have, and I think many liberals have, and I think the candidates have said as much.
And they should be forced to disclose that at the very least.
Sure, yeah,
Right.
if they do have one. And again, these things kind of matter on the circumstances and the qualifications of the judge and whether or not they have a record publicly on those issues.
Right. Allie, I'll give you the last word on this. What would your litmus test be?
I think for Republicans right now, the big issue is still Obamacare. And if a Republican's willing to try to fight to overturn it, I think that's something that should definitely be considered. And just their kind of stance on the Second Amendment and just constitutional things. Being a Republican, typically, if you're on the right anyway, most likely people are going to be okay with that. So for Republicans, that's kind of where they are.
All right, and we'll definitely see what happens with this Supreme Court nomination and whether Judge Garland becomes Justice Garland. We'll have to see. Coming up after the break, we'll discuss President Obama's recent visit to Cuba and his decision to normalize relations with the communist country. Stay with us.
Great journalism matters because it's critical to a democracy that the public is informed and engaged and involved. And that happens by having credible information. And so the most important thing, whatever the delivery platform, whatever the technology, whatever the business model, is that the information itself is coming in solid and important ways and is being conveyed in compelling ways because there's so much noise and competition out there. And so that's what I really want our students to be able to do, be brilliant storytellers, keen observers, and compelling communicators.
Raise high. This isn't just our battle cry. It's our call, our challenge. Because when you are called to Washington, you are called to higher expectations, to a higher standard. We are called here to advance knowledge, to serve society, to change the world. This is the George Washington University, and what we make is history. So stand up, be bold, take risks, press on. Push harder, raise high.
Welcome back. Last week, President Obama became the first U.S. president to visit Cuba since Calvin Coolidge went in 1928, and Coolidge took a battleship. This time, though, the commander-in-chief arrived in Havana in his jumbo jet, and the reasons for his visit were much different. In December 2014, Obama announced his intention to normalize relations with the communist nation. That included a laundry list of items, including restoring diplomatic ties, establishing embassies in the two countries, restarting mail service and commercial flights, and eventually ending the trade embargo. It was a historic two-day trip where Obama and his Cuban counterpart, Raul Castro, took questions from reporters and even attended a baseball game together. But there were some very obvious clashes. Castro said the two countries' relationship cannot be fully normalized until the U.S. closes the prison at Guantanamo Bay and lifts the embargo, both of which may not happen before Obama leaves office early next year. But despite these real challenges, Obama was cautiously optimistic about the future.
I have come here to extend the hand of friendship to the Cuban people. But we cannot and should not ignore the very real differences that we have about how we organize our governments, our economies, and our societies. Cuba has a one-party system. The United States is a multi-party democracy. Cuba has a socialist economic model. The United States is an open market. Cuba has emphasized the role and rights of the state. The United States is founded upon the rights of the individual.
Now, with any decision like this one comes fierce political opposition. Republicans have contended that Obama should not engage with Cuba until it holds free and fair elections, and Castro is no longer in power. Martin, is this fair criticism?
Well, do we close ourselves off to China? Do we prevent American businesses from making money in China? 95% of the world's markets are beyond our borders. Not to mention, we've tried this for over 50 years in Cuba, and it hasn't worked. We can't keep doing the same thing and depriving American businesses of the opportunity to access that market 90 miles off our shore. Visa, Chevrolet, Microsoft. These are some American companies that want to make money through free enterprise, bringing that to the Cuban people for American workers, helping our economy. I can't believe I'm a Democrat arguing in favor of free enterprise and businesses being able to sell their products wherever they want. So I agree with Republican Senator Jeff Flake, among others, in saying that this is really an expression of freedom that will help American business and workers.
So then are you confident that that Cuba can move past communism communism, or should President Obama have maybe waited until after the Castros are out of power and maybe wait for them to establish free and fair elections and kind of a democratic society, if that was a possibility?
Do you want to wait another 50 years or another 100 years? Fidel started his revolution before Obama was born. Let's think about that. And it hasn't worked since then. We can't keep pursuing the same failed policies that have deprived American workers and businesses of a market right offshore. Cuba is turning to Asia. Cuba is turning to Europe to get their products. Agricultural products, technological infrastructure, things that we can provide them at a lower cost because of our proximity and the lower shipping costs.
Ali, I'll let you respond to that, but I want to ask you, why do you think Obama is doing this now, of all times, at the very end of his presidency?
I think that's exactly why he's doing it now at the end of his presidency. He's trying to cement his legacy, and especially something like this, where this embargo has been in place since 1960. You have to think that this is a very political move on his part. He knows that if he's the president who can normalize relations with Cuba, that's something that's going to be in the history books, and kids are going to be reading about that. But at the same time, they are a communist country. They're constitutionally defined as like a Marxist-Leninist state. And so when we're dealing with a country that has public floggings of journalists because they disagree with their government, there shouldn't be a conversation about, oh, let's work with them. They should be figuring out how are we going to fix these issues before we even normalize relations with them.
Are Castro's demands regarding closing Guantanamo and ending the embargo reasonable to you?
I don't think so, until they can figure out what's going on internally and stop suppressions of free speech and treat their citizens with the respect that they deserve. I don't think we should be doing anything.
Martin, are you confident that those two things will happen before President Obama leaves office next year?
Well, Congress needs to act on that, and I'm not sure that will happen. But this does set in motion, I think, a really beneficial policy that businesses will really push for, and they'll pressure Republicans to do so. By the way, helping your legacy isn't a bad thing. Having people in the future look back on your policy positively, fondly, saying this worked and I like you for it in the future, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, and we should welcome that kind of forward-looking positive attitude that will ultimately build bridges, help our economy, and again, we don't close ourselves off to nations like China that have some similar human rights violations. We bring capitalism to them. We kill them with Coca-Cola. We bring our ideas to them, not close them off. And by the way, let them blame us for their economic woes. Let Castro tell his people that the reason you're in squalor is because America. Now it's not our fault. It's his. And so I think that people will realize that.
Ali, Martin's talking a lot about trade and the idea of our economies kind of working together. Do you think this issue of free trade versus protectionism that we're seeing in the 2016 campaign, do you think Cuba will factor into that when people go out and vote in the election?
I do. I think especially because he's gone now, will be much more of a conversation starter, among other things. And if we are going to trade with Cuba, there has to be kind of very serious regulations on that because of what's going on there.
Mm-hmm. So guys, after the terrorist attacks in Brussels this past week, President Obama received some criticism for staying at that baseball game with President Castro, the one between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Cuban national team. Ali, do you think President Obama should have maybe gone back to Washington or flown to Brussels or done something right after the attacks?
Of course, I think it was mildly tacky on his part to stay. I understand he came out and said you can't let terrorists dictate our daily lives, and to some extent I do agree with him on that. But at the same time, you are the president of the United States. You're not just a regular citizen going to a baseball game. You have a persona you should be putting on. You should be addressing these issues fully and coming out and making a statement. You shouldn't be at a baseball game.
Mm-hmm. Martin, do you think it was at the very least bad optics? He was wearing shades, talking with ESPN reporters at the game.
No, because I fully agree with the concept that terrorism's goal is to disrupt our daily lives. And he's not some random person at a baseball game. He's the president of the United States conducting public diplomacy with old enemies, building bridges as ISIS tries to burn bridges down, instead of retreating into our borders, or by the way, going to Brussels, where the police would have to focus on protecting and securing the president. Instead of finding the people who did this, that would be completely counterproductive. That would only be for those optics, and it would actually hurt the operation. So we should continue reaching out to people. We should continue building up our capitalist system that they're trying to take down, instead of, again, retreating into our borders, foregoing this public diplomacy with people who hate us. They want to divide us. They want us to stop this kind of behavior. And so At every turn, Republicans want to do exactly what they want, be it banning Muslims, be it making this an East versus West struggle, or be it stopping us from reaching out to other people, other cultures.
So speaking of ISIS, do you think that we're at risk of seeing more attacks, especially in Europe, now that these airstrikes seem to be at least having some effect on diminishing the territory that ISIS is holding in Iraq and Syria? So the question is whether these fighters who have come from Europe will return to Europe and carry out attacks like we've seen in Brussels. Do you worry that that's going to sort of be on the rise?
Well, you're absolutely right in pointing out that ISIS's territory is shrinking. They're not just being contained; they are losing on the battlefield. The front line, or the headline of the Washington Post said as much last night, that they're lashing out. These are, in some ways, sort of the final gasps of ISIS. By the way, in Europe, they have a really bad security infrastructure. They're bad at sharing information. We're better at doing that here in the United States. I hope Europe can do their best. I hope we can help them in any way possible. But again, ISIS is losing on the battlefield. Just now, the Syrian forces are retaking Palmyra. And I think what you're going to see is this force, which has enemies on all sides, is going to continue shrinking, and they'll retreat back into just a terrorist organization instead of a proto-state.
Allie, I'll let you have the last word on that.
There's actually CNN op-ed recently published about this, and I don't think this is the last time ISIS is going to be trying to do this. Their whole goal is to instill fear in citizens by doing these random attacks. I mean, Paris, Beirut, now Brussels. It's not shocking that they're doing this, and at the same time, we have to anticipate more of what's going on, because this is a very radicalized group of people. They're angry, they're upset, and those tensions are driving them to do this. I mean, you had Al-Qaeda, you have all these other groups, and just because ISIS might be getting contained or shrinking doesn't necessarily mean they're going anywhere anytime soon, unfortunately.
All right, guys, thank you so much. And after this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us. Welcome back. Our panel joins us again for Rapid Fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. Despite his victory in the Ohio Republican primary, John Kasich cannot mathematically win the necessary delegates over the remaining primaries and caucuses to secure the GOP nomination. So, Allie, why is John Kasich still in the race, and is he splitting the anti-Trump vote?
Of course he is. I mean, look at what happened in Arizona. He came in 4th out of 3 candidates. Rubio came ahead of him. I think he thinks that if it goes to a contested convention, he's going to win, which I don't understand why he thinks that. The GOP has started to back Cruz a lot more now because they realize he's the viable option against Trump. And he keeps splitting the vote, and he just needs to drop out.
Martin, I imagine this is not a burning question on your mind as a Democrat.
Well, I mean, I like strategy, and Kasich has this really interesting strategy of winning in states of which he is already governor. And he's trying to make that a national strategy. And it's not working, obviously. But it's fun to sit back and eat some popcorn as Republicans tear themselves apart.
They're having a lot of popcorn in Brooklyn right now, that's for sure. Russian President Vladimir Putin recently announced that Russia has achieved its goals in Syria and would be withdrawing most of its troops from the region. Martin, how does this affect the situation in Syria and any potential future U.S. actions?
That's rapid fire. But again, as you see, they've achieved their objective. They're leaving because they believe that the Syrian government, while it's not ideal, has retaken certain major strongholds. And as I mentioned earlier, they're starting to attack ISIS in Palmyra, and they're probably going to be successful in doing that. Russia has made the calculation that they're no longer necessary there, and that the Islamic State, again, is shrinking even as they are lashing out.
Allie?
I think it'll be interesting to see what actually happens. If you look at Afghanistan in 2014, 2015, NATO is actually, they're pulling troops. The U.S. was saying they're pulling troops. Those troops didn't leave. They ended up staying because of how the security systems were going. So it'll be interesting to see if they actually pull out those troops and how that all plays out. Not really sure.
And finally, Martin, right up your alley, but former Benghazi committee staffer Bradley Podliska filed a lawsuit against the committee last October, alleging he was fired because he didn't choose to focus his investigation on Hillary Clinton. Podliska has since revised the lawsuit, removing any reference to Clinton. Martin, does this delegitimize the Democrats' claim that it's a purely partisan investigation targeting Secretary Clinton?
No, as you know, I interned on the Benghazi committee, for the Democrats, of course. And he's removing this to help his lawsuit. It's some weird legal thing that his lawyers told him to remove this from the suit. But we don't need this guy. We have Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who came out and said the entire purpose of the Benghazi committee is to harm Hillary Clinton, tank her poll numbers. So we have that quote. It's there, and he offered that voluntarily. So we know what this is about. It has proved what what we've known all along.
Allie?
I mean, maybe you shouldn't commit a federal offense. Like, that's,
She hasn't.
I mean, if you,
She
but, I
hasn't.
mean, look at Petraeus and like, or not, was it Petraeus? Yeah, I think it was Petraeus, who did the same thing, and they were talking about removing a star. I mean,
Not the same thing, no.
you have to think about that. You shouldn't be doing those sort of things. You shouldn't be using a personal email server to share top secret confidential information.
Tell that to Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, who, by the way, never were part of a controversy because they never ran for president.
Well, for the record, Rice and Powell, they did not use a private server. They only used private accounts.
Very true. But she did not break any law, and asked the best lawyers in the country and the Justice Department as well. All this conditional statement, if she's indicted, she's not going to be indicted. I guarantee you that.
All right, we'll have you guys back for a Hillary Clinton email segment.
I look
we'll
forward
see if
to
she
it.
does. Yeah, we'll bring you guys back. Thank you so much. And with that, we end our debate here on Colonial Crossfire. Thank you so much to Martin McSherry and Allie Kukos for joining us. When we come back, Casey Decker joins us to give an update on the presidential race. Stay tuned.
We have a big problem on college campuses, and it's on us to stop it.
It's happening at bars, at parties, even in residence halls.
It's happening to our friends, and it's happening to our teammates.
It's called sexual assault, and it has to stop.
There's no consent, or someone can't consent. It's rape. It's assault.
It's wrong, and it's a crime.
If I saw it happening, I would do something about it.
If I saw it happening, I'd speak up.
If I saw it happening, I'd help, not blame.
Because I don't want to be part of the problem.
I want to be part of the solution.
We need all of you to be part of the solution.
This is about respect. It's about responsibility.
It's up to all of us to put an end to sexual assault.
Because one is too many.
And it's on us to stop it.
Welcome back. Domestic and foreign topics on tonight's show overshadowed our usual discussions of the 2016 presidential race. Casey Decker joins me now at the desk to give us a campaign update. Casey, what's been happening in this unpredictable primary race?
Well, Andrew, I think everyone has officially run out of ways to describe this election. It's been a wild ride from the start, and the last few weeks were no different. March featured a number of crucial primary states, namely Florida and Ohio. Heading into the Florida primary, the Republican establishment was still hoping that Marco Rubio could overtake Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and eventually take the nomination. Rubio had endorsements from dozens of members of Congress who insisted over and over that Rubio could become the nominee and defeat Hillary Clinton. But he was far behind in the polls and the delegate count. He banked his entire campaign on winning Florida, and then he lost. Trump took the state and all of its delegates, beating Rubio by nearly 20%. Rubio then dropped out of the race, leaving only Trump, Cruz, and John Kasich. Kasich, despite lagging even further behind in the polling and delegates than Rubio, had a much better night. He won his home state of Ohio and all of its delegates and was able to stay in the race. But his odds of winning the nomination remain very small. He still trails Trump and Cruz by a wide margin, and the establishment has not rallied around Kasich the way they did for Rubio. In fact, in yet another remarkable turn of events, many prominent Republicans have begun to endorse Ted Cruz. Cruz is notoriously disliked by his colleagues in Washington, but it seems some of them want so badly to stop Trump, they're willing to bite the bullet and throw their support behind Cruz. Case in point, Senator Lindsey Graham. Graham has had some harsh words for Cruz in the past, but now he's changing his tune, saying he will try to help Cruz defeat Trump in any way he can. With Trump winning state after state, the movement to stop him is growing desperate. One option may be a contested convention. In order to win the Republican nomination, a candidate needs 1,237 delegates. Right now, Trump has 739 committed delegates, thanks to his primary victories. 944 delegates are still up for grabs. If he doesn't have the magic number come convention time, Trump won't automatically win the nomination. But Trump and his supporters say if he enters the convention with the most delegates and leaves without a nomination, the party would be robbing its voters. Trump has even said it could cause riots. On the Democratic side, things have been much less chaotic. Despite Bernie Sanders winning several states, Hillary Clinton has developed and padded a nearly insurmountable lead. Even without superdelegates, party insiders who can vote for whoever they want at the convention and who largely support Clinton, she dominates the delegate count. Unless Sanders makes an unprecedented comeback, Clinton will likely have the nomination wrapped up before the convention in July. So, in short, Andrew, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton continue to gain momentum and delegates, and unless this election somehow finds a way to be even crazier than it already is, looks like those two are going to be the ones who meet on that debate stage for the general election.
Well, it certainly does look like it'll be Trump and Clinton, and boy, will those debates be fiery. Casey, thanks so much. When we come back, Mike Falco has our debate fact check.
Over the fall semester, GW student-athletes have participated in over 4,800 hours of community service throughout the D.C. metro area. In a competition organized by Helper Helper, GW has completed more service hours than any other NCAA Division I or Division II institution. We are now in our final week. Follow GW Sports and Helper Helper app on Twitter to see the final rankings.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact-checkers monitored our debate. Mike Falco is here to fill us in on what we missed. Mike?
Thanks, Andrew. Discussing the Biden rule, our liberal debater Martin said that the Senate confirmed 8 Supreme Court justices while Joe Biden was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. However, the Senate only approved 5 Supreme Court nominees while he was chairman. In regards to free trade, Martin said that 95% of world markets are outside of the United States. In reality, the U.S. controls 34.17% of the world stock market cap. On the right, Ali said the Cuban embargo began in 1960. In fact, the embargo was signed by President Kennedy in 1962. Ali also said that journalists have been flogged in Cuba. While journalists who undermine or criticize the Cuban government are subject to lengthy prison sentences or possibly even death, I was unable to find any records of floggings in Cuba. That's it for the fact check. Andrew?
Thanks, Mike. And now for Spilled Milk. Here's our tribute to the very best of late-night political comedy.
Today, my love has gone away. The bottle stands so long. A simple of the dawn.
Hasn't spent time in Washington.
Yes, and congratulations, Mitt Romney, because you still haven't spent any time in Washington. Perfect record, yeah.
And I apologize in advance, Cuba, because once you got hotels, it's only a matter of time before you're inundated with drunk American college kids on spring break, and that's the real Bay of Pigs.
You millennials, you're fired up, you're angry, and I'm angry too, because the top 10% of the top 1% control 90% of the wealth in this country. And I've always said that, ever since I was a young boy growing up in Brooklyn. Oh, Brooklyn.
Here we go. Pro, the university will offer hundreds of classes. Con, or as Trump put it, it's very, very classy.
It doesn't matter if Obama would nominate George W. Bush. I would still not do it.
Wait.
You created a hypothetical using the best candidate you could think of, and you came up with George W. Bush. Why? I wouldn't go into that restaurant if Guy Fieri himself was the chef.
A good compromise candidate. And there is an experienced party elder that everyone respects. And it's John Boehner, who thinks we should make Paul Ryan do it.
All right, well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. For all the latest updates from our political team at any time, be sure to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. For all of us here at GWTV, I'm Andrew Desiderio. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.